Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my personal thoughts on what the Koraidon and Miraidon sets should be for the Paldea Prologue format. This is a VGC format that is going on over the weekend. Actually, it's going to be an online tournament where you could bring one of Koraidon or Miraidon with any other Pokemon in the Pokedex. This means that the Ruin Pokemon, the Paradox Pokemon besides Walking Wake and Iron Leaves, as well as anything in the 1 through 400 slots, including one of Miraidon and Koraidon, will be legal. So if you enjoy this and you want to see some more guides like this, leave a like below and subscribe for more. And to answer the comment question of the day, will you be using Koraidon or Miraidon in your Paldea Prologue tournament runs? I think that I might end up using Koraidon, not because I think it's objectively better or worse, but because I think a lot less people will be using it, and I do kind of want to show off the fact that I still think it'll be good, but if I can't really think of a good team around it, I might just build Miraidon instead, because it feels a lot more brain dead and a little less sun reliant, but I'm not too sure what I'm going to use yet. I might also just take comment suggestions, so comments, which would you want to see me use? Let's figure that out as well. But with that said, I decided to come up with 3 sets for each Pokemon. Now, I'm not going to act like I am the sudden best person to go to for sets like these, but I didn't see a lot of people really talking about specific sets. At best, I've seen people showing off Miraidon usage, and that's about it, which is typical. You know, Miraidon's like a really good option, and I think that Miraidon is probably the option that a lot of people will go with, so that's why I'm going to start with that. But I do think that Koraidon will have a lot of options as well, and I think that you can actually even use Koraidon as a really good check to Miraidon, and you could use Miraidon as a really good check to Koraidon, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But overall though, with that said, I guess let's start off with the first set from Miraidon. I figured starting right off the bat, let's look into a weakness policy build. Now, essentially, what you would probably do with a weakness policy set like this, you would most likely take advantage of Miraidon next to a really good Ice Shard Pokemon. Now, I won't act like there's a lot of great Ice Shard options. In fact, if we look through Ice Sharders, we have a couple good ones, but Qianpao will do way too much damage. Baxcalibur will also do way too much damage. And then everything else, Titan also will probably do too much. So everything else right up here, like all these are really good heavy physical attackers, which are really terrible mons. I think you'd probably be pairing this most likely next to a Abomasnow. And I think Abomasnow actually could offer a lot to this anyway, if we were to like really look into it. Because Abomasnow would also be a really good support Pokemon with stuff like Aurora Veil, for example. And it's also a decent way to clear through the Koraidon's weather, which could at least allow Miraidon access to at least a little bit better ability to take hits from it. Obviously, you know, Abomasnow is going to get completely crushed by Koraidon, but at the very least, clearing through the sun will help a lot with the general purpose of your team doing damage and taking hits from it, so that will be hopefully pretty valuable. But overall, essentially, this weakness policy build would just take advantage of stuff like Parabolic Charge and perform a similar role to what Belly Bolt does on Trick Room teams, where this move essentially, it's a spread move that hits all your partners, including yourself, and you're able to gain back 50% of the damage that you deal through recovery. Now, this is where I think that Abomasnow probably ends up being the best option here, because not only is Abomasnow able to get off a fairly weak Ice Shard in comparison to stuff like Weavile, stuff like Qianpao, Baxcalibur, Frostlass. Well, Frostlass would also be a fairly weak one, but I'll get into that in a second. But the one benefit that Abomasnow also does have is the fact that it's already resistant to Parabolic Charge. Now, obviously, pairing this with the ground type as well also works out very well. The issue being, though, is you don't have a great way to really pop weakness policy outside of going for Bulldoze, which means you're popping it fairly slowly, which is why the Ice Shard is a recommended option. The Bulldoze, you have a lot of good options. For example, obviously, you have the Tinglu. Tinglu would be an amazing Bulldoze partner, though you still will have other Pokemon. I believe Tusk, for example, gets Bulldoze. We can actually figure this out, because I forget what the Bulldoze Pokemon are right now. So yeah, so Great Tusk does get Bulldoze. Iron Treads also gets it, but you're not running Iron Treads, let's be honest. Tinglu, Garchomp, yep, so those all get it. There's not really a lot of great Pokemon that you'd want to run, to be honest. Again, Bulldoze also just is inferior, in my opinion, as far as sets go, because you may as well just go for the Ice Shard, which will have, as I said, a much better time of just activating first. This will allow Miraidon to break through any sort of bulkier Pokemon that would otherwise outpace your slower threats that would be going for Bulldoze. Because Garchomp even still is at only 1 or 2 speed, which is kind of slow for this format. And especially versus some sort of Tailwind team that could end up making or breaking your damage output. But whereas with Miraidon just making sure it can OHKO everything, it's pretty valuable. Now, the set does have a couple drawbacks. For one, despite the immediate increase to your Draco Meteor, it's really only a one-time boost, and then essentially if you need to switch out for whatever reason, or on top of this as well, after you've already dropped your special attack with Draco, you no longer have a way to start consistently boosting your damage outside a Hadron engine, which could be a little bit of a thing. Terrain's actually fairly good in VGC right now, even outside of Electric. You're still seeing stuff like Armors and DD's high spam, though I don't think we'll see it a lot in this format just because of the fact that the power creep is a lot higher, and also the fact that we'll have to deal with all the Ruin Pokemon going around. But for what it's worth, that core might not be terrible into stuff like Koraidon matchups, and it's definitely not horrible in Miraidon, especially clearing through the terrain. But the one issue as well that Miraidon's going to have, though, is with stuff like Misty Terrain. I think this will have a huge issue with Grimmsnarl sets. However, at the very least, Misty Terrain existing does help a bit with this Terra Fairy, because it means you don't have to worry about the Thunder Wave if you are in Misty Terrain at least. So it's a give and take. Speaking of, let's explain why Terra Fairy. So Terra Fairy is mostly here as an option to handle Koraidon a bit easier. You're able to take these stabs from both the Fighting and Dragon significantly more easily, as Dragon goes from super effective to an outright immunity. Meanwhile, the Fighting goes from neutral to resist. So really the only thing that actually gets a little bit worse for your matchup would be stuff like Flare Blitz Koraidon, which even still, you could take that fairly well, and no one's going to click that immediately into Miraidon because of the fact that previously you would be resistant to it because you're Dragon typing. So overall, weakness policy will be decent. For a lot more straightforward of a build, we have the choice specs. Now, as far as the 4 moves go, they're a little bit up to your choosing. Personally, I think that objectively Volt Switch, Electro Drift, and Draco are all mandatory on this. Draco's primary Dragon Stab, and it helps you dent through pretty much anything that's neutral even. Electro Drift as well, again, really strong way to deal a ton of damage. Volt Switch is good to give this thing some general form of momentum here. Though you could also actually go with U-Turn. U-Turn would be a strong way to pivot even on ground types, which honestly I think I kind of like that a bit more. I don't know why I didn't have U-Turn on the example to begin with, but forgot it had it until I started going over the point. The last slot, though, can be whatever you want. We have a lot of good options here. Now, I personally like Terra Fairy with Gleam again, for the same reasons I liked it on Weakness Policy, but you still have some other good moves here. Dragon Pulse could be a really good just cleaning option for Dragon-type spamming. There's going to be a lot of viable dragons, so that's a considerable option. We also have Flash Cannon, which could help with other Terra Fairy Miraidons, especially without having to deal with the 50-50. We have Overheat and Power Gem, which are good, respectively, with Overheat being great for steals, which should open up Dragon attacks later on, since this will also pair well with a lot of dragons. We also have Power Gem, which has some use against stuff like Roaring Moon, for example, if it's flying, but honestly, Power Gem feels kind of useless for what it's worth, because Electric Drift will hit pretty much everything that it would have been useful for otherwise. But I do recommend, at least for viable options, I would say Overheat, Flash Cannon, or Dazzling Gleam are probably your best 3 for that 4th slot. I like Gleam because it's also a good spread option that this thing gains, because you don't really have another one outside of Parabolic. You could also go with Parabolic, actually, but I don't think the specs really takes advantage of it. And unlike something like the Weakness Policy set, not being able to change out of it is a little annoying. But overall, Miraidon's still fairly valuable. I think it's still a great pick here. You would want to pair this really well. So the Weakness Policy set that you're definitely going to want to pair with like a really good ground type and probably some Ice Shard Pokemon that could mutually be Donphan, but you're shooting yourself in the foot making that slot, and you're going to go from a really decent Ice Shard partner with a Bomb of Snow and a random really good ground type to a really shitty Ice Shard user that's not really going to be alive past the turn, and then you're not going to have your ground type. So I don't recommend doing the Donphan despite the fact that it gets both. Someone will do it though. Someone's going to twist my words, and I don't like that. For this set, on the other hand, you'd probably want to pair this more so with Pokemon like Bundle, Talonflame, etc. Essentially just a blanket really good team. You don't really need specific partners to really tailor your set. You could just throw this on a really good vanilla team and make it work. The final one, though, we have is the Electro Seed set. Now, you might be wondering what the FizzDev investment is for, and this actually has a couple different purposes. So initially, I'd actually calc this set within versus Life Orb Koraidon, that you would be able to be 3-hit KO'd by Flare Blitz, which is actually pretty good. Now, for what it's worth, this is a caveat, actually, because when I made my calc earlier, I had actually calc that with Reflect Up on accident. So now instead, no, never mind. Yeah, so I actually do need to change that calc, because I realized afterwards that I had made this with Reflect in mind, which Reflect is not the set that you have. So instead, what we're going to go with here is we're going to go with 228 in FizzDef. We're going to go with 4. And then we're going to go down to 20 special attack. Now, this would be a lot more bulky of a Miraidon. Speaking of, because of obviously how much more you're dropping here, initially when I thought that it could be this high, I thought it was worthwhile to keep on the 3 attacks. But you're probably going to want to get rid of Gleam actually on this sort of moveset. And you're going to want to go with a Calm Mind here. This will help boost your damage output and help you just have some general good longevity. And again, Terra Fairy, forgot to change that. But essentially the goal of this set would be to try and take hits as well as possible from Koraidon. With the investment specifically, you're able to take on even a Terrestrial Fire Flare Blitz from Life Orb Koraidon, which is including the Sun Boost obviously. However, if you want to dumb down the investment a lot, you could actually go down to the, you could actually just go down to 0 investment. With 0 investment, Life Orb Koraidon pre-Terra would not be able to KO you. In fact, you would only take about 83.4% max, which is pretty good. But I do think that preparing for Terra Fire will be valuable because despite the fact that on ladder I've currently been seeing a lot of fighting, I feel like Fire will be a lot better for that Miraidon matchup, as especially with Terra Fairy Miraidon being the common thing. It's really the best way to actually deal damage, just blanket versus a lot of Pokemon. And Koraidon also essentially gains a 3rd stab with it. That's also Sun Boosted, which is pretty good. So I would definitely be accounting for that Flare Blitz at the very least. It's going to be an insanely hard, heavy hitting attack for opponents to take. So I think that going with this really bulky spread works. Miraidon also probably doesn't even really need to click Calm Mind, to be honest. It's going to be so overwhelming damage-wise with the 135 special attack, with the Hadron Engine boosting not only its electric, but also with the special attack. It's going to be insane to honestly take this Pokemon on. And I think that you could probably pair this with something like a Grimmsnarl Screens set with like Screens, Thunder Wave, and then some sort of filler option like Parting Shot, Spirit Break, Foul Play, and get a lot of mileage out of this. But overall though, this Miraidon will be filthy. I think the Electric Seed set, if I was looking at running Miraidon, would probably be the set I'd want to run. I think it's going to be really good, especially against anti-Miraidon teams. Well, as an option for anti-Miraidon matchups, I should say. But overall, should be a pretty valuable option for this Pokemon in my opinion. Miraidon, I'm going to guess, will probably be the majority shareholder for usage, though. I think that the most common set will definitely be Choice Specs, as I think it's the one that fits the easiest on teams, truthfully. I think Weakness Policies are cool or not, but I think it's objectively the worst of the 3. I think the set, though, at least has a lot of defense merit, because it not only helps you a lot against opposing Miraidon with Calm Mind, but it's also a really strong way around Koraidon, so you could be prepared for both options, which isn't really a luxury that the other 2 sets actually have. They're not as easily prepared, and a Life Orb Terrifier Koraidon could actually put a lot of pressure, especially if you've already went through your Terrestrial there. You don't have that 50-50 anymore, and it could actually be a big issue for you. So while I do think that overall these 3 sets are all fairly usable, I think that this will be the most used. I think this one might have the highest ceiling though. But that's at the very least out the window. We're talking about Koraidon now. Now Koraidon I think is going to be a lot harder to pull off, but I think that it will still have some good places in the meta. I think that Koraidon's going to be most likely ran as Terra Fire. This is a really strong way to boost the Flare Blitz, which is your best way to hit Terra Fairy sets neutrally. It also gives you a Fairy resistance when otherwise you would be 4 times weak, so that should be valuable for stuff like Gleam Miraidons, which will probably be a fairly common coverage option just for Koraidon matchups. I think that ultimately the moveset of Dragon Claw, Collision Course, and Flare Blitz with Protect is probably the best set for Life Orb. You could also throw Sword Dance on over this, but I think there's actually a better Sword Dance set, which I'll go into that in a bit. Though I will say it's definitely very partner dependent. With this, really all you would need is redirection to pull off Sword Stance, and you just get rid of Protect, throw it on with like an Indeedee, and you're probably gonna honestly be fine. You could even throw on like Indeedee Armarouge, let Indeedee go down to some really strong breaker, and then bring an Armarouge in tandem with Koraidon to start breaking through teams. And I think it would probably be a really solid option, to be honest. But overall, this should be a really good breaker. Collision Course is obviously a really strong option versus anything that's super effective at stealing double damage. So this could be valuable versus stuff like Terra Steel Dozo is a really strong way to shatter it. Meanwhile, the Miraidon, of course, is a really strong way around the water types with Electro Drift, as well as stuff like Flying and all that. So they both have a lot of merit here. But ultimately, though, I think that Koraidon will probably be a decent option. I think you could make this work on a Sun build. I don't know if you really need to, but if you're going to run it on Sun, pair it with Fluttermane, because Fluttermane will also help a ton with your Miraidon issues. Because essentially all you need to do is go for something like a Dazzling Gleam or a Moonblast into Miraidon, and then go for Flare Blitz, and that should account for essentially any common Terra type. Because if for some reason Miraidon turns into a resist for Fairy, it's going to be something like Fire, which I guess Fire would be an interesting Terra. It would resist both Fairy from Fluttermane as well as Flare Blitz. But at the same time, you'd be weaker to a lot of other things. You'd be even worse off against Ground, so I don't know why you'd really do that. But the point being, though, is I think that ultimately that would be a fairly safe lead for you. You could also pair this thing with like an Iron Bundle and go for Icy Wind support, which would allow you to break any sort of speed tie that Miraidon might give, which is pretty valuable, as well as being helpful for the fact that Miraidon will set terrain for you anyway, so you don't even need booster energy at that point. But ultimately, though, Koraidon will still be fairly good. Speed control is great on this, or as a partner for this, I should say. There's a lot of good screens users you can use, though I think, again, the screens users will have a higher ceiling in the later sets, such as the dedicated Sword Dance set. Specifically, one screen setter in particular, which I guess, let's go over that. I've been hinting at this a lot. Misty Seed Koraidon. Now, this is essentially the inverse to the Electric Seed set. But with this in mind, your goal is essentially to try and take on Miraidon as well as possible. With the 12 in HP and the 172 in your speed def, this is, from what I was able to find, the most optimal way to actually take on a hit from... Okay, so for what it's worth, actually, you don't need the... okay, so never mind. I guess... Oh, you know what? No. Okay, so this is... I'm realizing why now. So essentially, the thought behind this sort of spread would be for the Electro Drift. With this investment, you're able to actually be 3 account guaranteed by Choice Specs Electro Drift. However, there's a big caveat to this because this is actually only including in the Misty terrain, which is where you'd activate your Misty Seed. Now, there's a very easy way to activate this actually, because essentially all you need to do at the terrain is activate it once you've already seen the Miraidon come in, and then click Misty Terrain manually with Prankster Grimmsnarl. You should be able to get away from Miraidon's really strong damage output this way, and on top of it as well, you actually turn into a very terrifying Sword Dance option here. With this moveset in particular, you would actually be able to turn into a really strong sweeper with the Flame Charge here, because even with Flame Charge alone, at +2, you're doing around 73% to Terra Fairy Miraidon, and obviously, you know, you could just go with Flare Blitz, and Flare Blitz would OHKO even if you went with 0 attack, which means you could probably just throw 4 into we'll switch the Fizz Def and the attack stat investments. But ultimately, though, I do like the idea of Flame Charge because at +4, you should be able to KO versus the Electric Seed sets. Albeit, I don't know if you can KO versus this one, you probably couldn't. However, you should still do some significant damage to majority of Miraidon builds. And again, you're 3 KO'd, which is pretty incredible, because you could also pair this thing next to Heal Pulse Pokemon, or just some sort of redirection. Parting Shot Grim is still a great partner, because you can go with like Misty Terrain, Light Screen, Parting Shot, and then Reflect, and just get a lot of mileage out of that. Bring in some sort of support like Brute Bonnet at that point as well, and you're just cooking. Because really, even if Miraidon has something like an Overheat as a rare coverage for Bonnet, that means it's probably not touching Koraidon really well. Which should be pretty beneficial for you, in my opinion. I don't think there's really a lot of things that Miraidon can actually do against this set, and I do think this set will actually have a super high ceiling in tandem with Misty Terrain Grim. It's essentially going to be the anti-Miraidon Koraidon set, so I think that will be very valuable. You might be wondering, what does this set do to opposing Koraidon? Well, it's a good question. Opposing Koraidon typically aren't going to really be caring just to... Well, okay, so that's a lie. Koraidon actually could be, in theory, an actual issue for this thing. For one, with the fact that Koraidon will have to deal with, let's see, so, oh my god, so, I'm looking at calcs, and Terra Fire, oh no, man, that's +4, right? Okay, that makes so much more sense. I mean, even still, Terra Fire on this build, with Flare Blitz, is a roll for 3 KO versus just no bulk Koraidon. That's kind of fucking insane. Okay, so, with the Dragon Claw set, we're gonna throw on Collision Course as well as my damage calc metrics. Essentially, so versus Terrestrial, Collision Course would be able to still roll for a 2 KO. Actually, never mind. With investment, it's a guaranteed 2 KO. Even if you did switch the Fizz Def and the attack, it would be a guaranteed 2 KO, but it's still, you still take the hit fairly well. And again, pairing it next to some sort of redirection Pokemon like a Brute Bonnet, especially like a Terra Fairy Bonnet, could be a really strong mutual check to this and Miraidon as a really good redirector. But essentially, the goal with Koraidon would be to try and set up with Sword Dance with like a Shireen's Grim, use it as support, and then try and break through opponents, which I think you could do very well. You could also go with some sort of redirector, like not redirector, like a support piece, something like a Thunder Ray Pokemon. Though more importantly, it would probably be Iron Bundle again, because Iron Bundle would be a strong way to at least get some Icy Wind off and spread drop your target. And also with the Flare Blitz, you're going to boost your speed even further anyway with the, well, not Flare Blitz, the Flame Charge. Though if you do have a really good speed controller, you could change this for Flare Blitz. The damage output is insane with that. It truly is like leaps and bounds above Flame Charge, but I do value the idea of having the built-in speed control here, as you're bulky enough to take on Miraidon well anyway. And you can still guarantee the 2 KO at +2, so essentially you just go for Sword Stance and then 2 Flame Charges, and you beat Miraidon with that, assuming it popped a Terra Fairy. And if it didn't pop a Terra Fairy, then you Flame Charge into Dragon Claw, and you just massacre it that way. But ultimately, though, I do think, genuinely speaking, this is probably going to be the best Koraidon set. I would actually be genuinely astounded if someone found a set that would be more valuable against the wider metagame, and also have an actual reason to run this over ditching Miraidon, because I would love to see it. I think, for what it's worth, there's still other really good options on Koraidon. But I think this is the one that has the highest ceiling, because you would essentially be taking care of one of the biggest problem childs in the metagame while still matching up fairly well as a really good cleaner. And once you start flame charge boosting too, you're pretty terrifying. And another added benefit as well is, thanks to the Misty Terrain, you can't even be Thunder Waved. And because nothing will be fast enough to actually Icy Wind you viably, you're going to be pretty well set off, in my opinion. You'll also protect against burns with the Terra Fire. You could, in theory, also go with a different Terra type, but I like Fire for boosting the Flame Charge damage. It's a fairly weak attack, so you do kind of want to get any damage boost you can out of this, and it's also, again, Fairy Resistance. But overall, though, I think this will be the best set for it, for what it's worth. I think this is the set that I'm going to probably run personally, but there's probably a lot of different options you guys have going to this format for sure. The final set we're going to go over Choice Band. Now, one of our specs, Miraidon, and Choice Banded Koraidon is going to be pretty similar. You're using this as a really good breaker. You're going to want to pair this with partners such as Talonflame and Iron Bundle, essentially just really good speed control. Now, I chose Ironhead here. I figured this would be a nice, super effective way to hit random Terra Fairy mons, but if we're going to be honest, this could be Drain Punch. This could be a lot of different things. I think that Flare Blitz, Collision Course, and Dragonclaw will all be ultimately more valuable. I just realized this thing got Bulk Up. I forgot about Bulk Up. You could throw Bulk Up on the set as well. You would definitely want Flare Blitz if you're going to go with that, and then some sort of really good speed control partner, because you're not going to do enough damage, and you're going to lose the 1v1 versus Miraidon by going for Bulk Ups versus Sword Stance, but it's definitely still an option nonetheless. The final thing, though, again, with Banded Koraidon, essentially you would be using this as a really good breaker here. Now, you have a lot of options for moveset number 4. Similar to how Miraidon had a lot of coverage spots, you could use something like, for example, Outrage would be pretty valuable. Outrage would be a really strong dragon attack that you could obviously use to just break through teams easier with your stab, since it will be significantly harder hitting than Dragonclaw. We have Ice Fang. Sadly, no Ice Punch, but Ice Fang is honestly still pretty good. It could be good for ground matchups. You have Ironhead. You have the Stopping Tantrum. You have Low Kick, but why run Low Kick, to be honest? You can go with Terra Blast as well in a coverage type. That could be pretty good. U-Turn could be good. In fact, U-Turn's actually probably the best one, to be honest. I don't know how I forgot that both of these mons got U-Turn, but that would probably be the best case on Koraidon, personally. Though I think you have a lot of good options. Terra Blast could be interesting as well, as that would be a great way to potentially handle niche counterplay like Dondozo or Gastrodon, at least for a lot better damage than you're currently doing. Now, I do recommend actually going with the Terra Fighting in this build. I think this build essentially would be banking off of spamming Collision Course in most cases, as there's not really a lot of great fighting checks in this format. There are definitely some, and the fighting checks that are there invalidate clicking a fighting move, for what it's worth. Stuff like Fluttermane, for example, would outright sponge you. Terra Fairy, Miraidon, obviously Garganacl with Terra specifically into Poison or Ghost could be pretty good. But the options that actually do truly handle fighting are very few and far between, and especially with Orichalcum Pulse, if it's not a really bulky resistance or just a general immunity, you're probably going to be able to at least 2-hit KO it with the Bandit set, and that's pre-Terra in all honesty. In fact, what we can actually do, I'm kind of curious, so I'm going to calculate. Let's calc for the bulky, well, we'll just calc off of the bulky special attack booster energy set on the damage calc versus Choice Banded Collision Course, with which the just max attack, and the Terra Fighting. Now, this is obviously, we're going to go for Terra Fairy to still keep the resist in mind. I don't even need to pop a Terra, actually, never mind. Banded just outright does, Banded outright does 61% min versus the bulky booster energy set, which for anyone wondering how bulky that set is, the one on nerdofnow.github.io, which is it's a VGC calc I use in all my videos, but this is 236 HP and 252 Phys Def. It's a modest nature for what it's worth, but even still, that's fucking insane that this is just a 2-hit KO. We could probably make this even bold and try and see how that fares. 55.5 to 65.4 versus max bold. For what it's worth, I mean, I'm not going to act like Fluttermane's a bulky Pokemon, but this is sort of my point, that you not only need to actually be a resisted typing for this hit to be for this hit to not be a 2-hit KO, but you also then need to be fairly bulky and resistant. If we move on to the Garganacl calc, for example, we'll calc Terra Poison because Ghost is an obvious immunity there, though. But with the Terra Poison, though, versus Phys Def Garganacl, pre-Terra, you still actually do about 25% to 30%, which is pretty incredible. And if you stack that with a Terra Fighting, wherever fighting is. It's right here. Okay, so Terra fighting upside all the way to 34.2 to 40%. And keep in mind, this is versus max Vizdef. Garganacl typically runs 12 in Vizdef and then 244. That's not to say that that won't change for this format, but it is something to keep in mind, because if you calculate versus just the standard Garganacl's investment, you actually can roll a 2-hit KO, which is interesting. 45.1 to 53.3, which is honestly really fucking insane, because that's a Terra Poison Garganacl. That should be a resisted hit, and you could roll it on a Garganacl of all things. Albeit, again, not Vizdef invested, but it's still something to think about, because that is the way that people have been typically investing in their Garganacls. So I'm sure that people will actually tweak that investment for what it's worth, specifically to avoid the 2-hit KO, because all you actually need is 100 Vizdef with the 244 HP. In fact, you can even bump down the HP to 236 if you want, and then throw the rest into SpDef, which I think warrants you, let's actually check. Should be 172. Yep, 172 investment in SpDef, which is fairly good. So that's probably going to be what people will tweak Garganacl to, because I do think that actually, especially on the resisted Garganacls, going for that, making sure that you're avoiding the 2-hit KO on rolls for collision course is valuable. You could obviously just go with Terra Ghost as well, but I do think that Poison will have some merit as a check to also stuff like Dazzling Gleam Miraidon, for example. And it's just a really good fairy counter in general. It's great for walling Fluttermane. So I think it's personally what people will go with. But Ghost is still fine, honestly. Ghost is still an amazing set to run. Overall, though, Banded Koraidon I think will be great, but that's one of the reasons why, again, with how good these Terra Fighting calcs are, I really genuinely believe that you should run Terra Fighting on Banded specifically. It makes a world of a difference. Now, that's not to say that you can't get benefit out of running Terra Fighting on the Swords Dance build. You'll do a ton of damage with Drain Punch and Collision. But ultimately, I think that you're just a little bit better off with going for just the breaking aspect on these sets, because they're just already going to be built. You don't need to take a turn to set up, you'll just do damage. Now, one thing I do want to address, because I did just remember it, on the seed sets, you might be wondering why I'm not running the signature moves. And truthfully, it's because of how bulky their sets are. I wanted to value going for Drain Punch and Parabolic in these over the idea of going for the stabs. Electro Drift will still do a ton of damage anyway, obviously, but keeping yourself alive to do damage consistently to all targets will be more appreciated. And in Drain Punch's case, just making sure this thing doesn't fucking die is going to be valuable, because your entire investment is just really in bulk, essentially. Bulk and speed. It's not really needed on Band, though you could obviously ditch U-Turn or Dragon Claw for it if you wanted. And on this, again, you could ditch Collision Course for Drain Punch. But I think there's just a lot less reason to, because there are situations where that could really make a world of a difference. But let me know what you guys think of Koraidon and Miraidon in the Paldea Prologue tournament format. If you guys enjoy this and you want to see some more content describing just any upcoming online tour rule sets, just set guides for upcoming formats, really whatever, I guess, in terms of the information aspect, leave a like and subscribe. It shows that you enjoy the information content. I know a lot of the time when I've done the guides, up until like the most recent couple, they've done pretty bad. But if you guys are wanting to see more, I'm more than willing to do so. And I think that they're very fun to make. But with that said, make sure to comment down below as well. Answer the question of the day. Would you prefer to use Koraidon or Miraidon? And which one do you want to use as far as the sets go? It can be a set that I didn't describe here. I'd love to see what you guys have come up with. A lot of the times, you guys in the comments are a lot more creative than I am. So I'd love to see your guys' ideas. With that said, though, shout out to channel members being Josh K Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Bibat, and Anna Dipper. I appreciate your guys' support on the channel, and if you want to become a channel member for a couple dollars a month, the link to that is down below. And I will see you guys in tomorrow's video, where we're going to be using Wo Chien on the Battle Stadium ladder. Until then, peace out, guys.